too. Excellent. Hello, welcome to this great event, looking at the money moves you should be making or could be making in your 30s and 40s. I'm Frances Cook, and if you've come across my work before, it's probably in the Cooking the Books podcast, or maybe you've seen my book, Tales from a Financial Hot Mess. And if you haven't, then hello. I am a personal finance journalist and author, and I will be looking after you tonight. We will have a great panel with some speakers, and first of all, thank you very much to Hatch and Kernel for putting this event together, and of course to Xero Rewired for hosting us. Give a little clap. I can't clap, I might break the screen, but thank you guys for joining in. I've got to say there's a real problem with a lack of financial education in this country. Basically, you kind of have to figure it out on your own. If you're lucky enough, you have parents that help you work it out, or you might have one of the schools that take the initiative and they really, get you going on that, but it's the minority. And for most of us, we just kind of get left to figure out what's going on. And so if you're anything like me, what happens then is you just sort of end up wondering why your money is evaporating. You pay your bills, and then something happens, and then you're broke. Whereas, maybe you might be doing even slightly better than that. You might have a good, healthy savings account, but you don't know what to do with that savings account. And you know that people talk about putting your money to work, but you're not sure what that entails. And frankly, we all work too hard to just lose that money trying to figure it out by ourselves. So it is really important that we have evenings like this where we talk to each other about money and what we want to do with it. You don't want to end up treading water and just feeling a bit anxious. And there's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is that we talk about things that require courage. And a lot of the times, the things that we're talking about needing courage are actually things that need money instead. If you want to leave a job that you hate and you don't have an alternative yet, frankly, that takes money as well as courage. You might need to leave a bad relationship, and especially if you're living together, that's going to take money. Or maybe you want to start a business and you're not sure if it'll work, but if it does work, you get really wealthy. It takes courage, yes, but it also takes money. So figuring out these things and giving yourself some financial stability, some financial independence is really important, so that then your decisions will only require courage. Money is the oil that keeps our lives moving, and it saves us from bad decisions made out of desperation. So no pressure on our panelists tonight, but I am really glad that we're having an evening like this, especially in your 30s or 40s. This is the time where there is a lot of opportunity to make a lot of headway. So, bit of housekeeping shortly, but how tonight will run is that we will have our wonderful panelists. They will tell you some of their top tips. Then we will have a panel discussion, and of course we will open up the floor for you guys to ask your questions. And of course, if you want to ask questions anonymously, or if you're one of our wonderful people who are watching online, you can go to Slido, so that's sli.do, and then if you put in the event code Money Moves Auckland, then you can ask your questions. And what we really want to do is make sure we answer the main things that are on your mind tonight. There's only so much time, but let's see what we can do. So, with that, I believe we have a little bit of housekeeping coming from someone at Xero, is that correct?
Hello.
Hello.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Xero. We're stoked to have you all here. Hey, my name's Timmy. I help run the Rewired space here at Xero. We are a purpose-built co-working space that is powered by Xero with the hope of boosting small business in New Zealand. So if you have any questions about co-working or also about Xero, feel free to come and speak to me later. So a little quick health and safety coverage, I guess you could say. If there is an emergency, the fire alarms will sound. What that means is that you should walk out the door. So we have a couple of exits. We've got one out this door, and we also have an exit just down the end of the room and straight out past the front wall. If you do need to use the bathroom during this time, you're more than welcome to. It's not a problem. Just pass the elevators and take a right. Yeah, that is pretty much it. Hope you have a lovely night. I'm stoked to have you here and enjoy the show.
Thank you. All right, excellent. Let's get into this. Now, I'm going to kick things off for you with a little bit of where you start. Because it's really common, and I hear this all the time, is people go from being very financially unsure, and then they get a little bit of knowledge and they're straight into, I want to buy shares. Shares are awesome, don't get me wrong. But what you want to know first is where you're going. So every decision you're going to make, budgeting and money, is going to be at the core of it. You know, you need to be thinking about what your ideal life looks like. How much time do you want to spend working? What do you want to do with yourself? What do you want to do outside of work? These are all really important things to think about. You need to know the destination you're aiming for before you can figure out your strategy to get there. So some of the things that you need to start with is just talking about money. And this is important whether you're single or in a partnership, but definitely if you're in a partnership, whoever's on your team, you guys need to be on the same page. But if you're single or no matter what, you also need to get on the same page with yourself. And it's really important to be getting your mindset right. Money is, of course, the #1 cause of divorce, which is a fun note to start things on. But it is also the same people that looked at relationships breaking down because of money. They found that a significant minority of people became closer when they had money problems. And those are the people who decided, we're going to tackle this together, and we're going to figure out what's going on, and we're going to work this out as a team. And so you can help each other, pull each other out of a hole. One good way to start talking about money is to just take the pressure off things and go time traveling. So the first place I always start is talking to people about what's one of their first money memories, you know? And this is where you start to figure out how you feel about money and some of the reasons why you might have certain attitudes to it. And this is great with a partner so that you can figure out where they're coming from and how they feel about it. But it's also when you do it with yourself, you might have this mind-blowing realization suddenly of why you are always so anxious about this certain thing that you know shouldn't bother you this much. Or why you constantly do this dumb thing that you know you shouldn't, but you do it anyway. And when you start thinking about where you've come from with money, you know you might always be anxious about that certain thing, but you can figure out, okay, what's a more rational response to that? I know where that's coming from. And another thing that's really great is thinking, what would you do if you won lotto? And this is great, again, with a partner or by yourself, because when you think, what would I do if I won lotto? Doesn't even need to be Powerball, it can just be lotto. You know, that's your ideal life. As the saying goes, you can have anything but not everything. And so if you're thinking, $1 million drops into my lap, am I going to go traveling? Am I going to help out my family? Am I going to buy a house and pay it off? Maybe, given Auckland house prices. You know, this is suddenly your ideal life that you're thinking about, and you've taken the pressure off things by going time traveling so that you can think with a bit more clarity. And then you can say, well, I don't want to wait for lotto. I'm going to figure out how I do this myself. So everyone else is going to chat to you about investing, and that's great. The first place to start is the money to invest. You have to carve money out of your budget, and then you can put it to work. So the big one I always tell people to start with is your core expenses, and that's housing, transport, and food. I know everyone goes on about coffee, avocado on toast, right? Who groaned? That was, yeah. And you don't need to worry about saving $5 on coffee if you can save $200 on rent. You know, your big expenses are the ones that have the most room for change, and we often feel like they're locked in stone, and they don't have to be. You can decide if there is a different way you want to live your life. And the best thing about that as well is when you make these big core expense decisions, they're one and done. You know, if you manage to change your rent or your mortgage, then that's probably set for at least a year. Or if you manage to change how you're getting around the place, then that's probably just a new habit and you won't think about it again. So if you get creative and start thinking about how could you change your life differently, your life is different from mine, so I don't want to throw out different ideas because all you're going to say is, that wouldn't work for me. But you know what your life looks like, and you know what you could change within that. So you can think about things like if you can walk to work or if you can move. I do both. And it's stopping yourself from getting that decision fatigue. Rather than stressing out about a million little daily decisions, coffee and muffins, it's changing those big things and then moving on and letting yourself live your life. Because that's the other big thing that gives budgeting a terrible rap, is that people think of it as restricting themselves. Whereas I like to think about budgeting as making sure that you are prioritizing the things that matter to you, getting rid of the things that don't. So my next big tip for when you're looking for the space to carve out the money to invest is a money diary. And you just record everything that you buy for at least a week, more if you can put up with it. And you record how happy everything made you and how much you needed it. Now, there may be a point at which you need to rank just how happy things make you, but for the most part, everyone who's done this, and I've talked to about it, there was something that didn't even make them happy and that they didn't need, and they immediately cut it and they didn't look back. There is little things that creep in there, and once you see it on paper, our brains just work differently. You've got to see it written down sometimes. And cut it. Cut the things that you don't care about. Get rid of them. Who cares? I don't want you to give up the things that make you genuinely happy. I just want you to focus and know what those things are. And then you know where you're going. And all of a sudden, then you have some spare cash that can go into the fun stuff like investing and looking out for your future. And then you have the motivation as well to keep going because you've thought about what your ideal life looks like and you know that this is what's going to get you there. And these are, you know, if you get irritated by budgeting or you need to start over, you just go back to these core things once again. Why do you want to do this? What's the goal? What are your core expenses? Can you change them? What makes you happy? What do you need? What don't you need? And then it's back to the fun stuff. And so, speaking of that fun stuff, we have our first panelist for the evening, which is Kristen Lunman from HAT. You are, no problem. So, yeah, that's what happens when you don't set the order. So, Kristen, no stranger to New Zealand's startup ecosystem, loves working with digital disruptors, believes that technology should simplify our financial lives and help us be better with money. As Hatch's GM, she spends her time working to inspire Kiwis to be as wealthy as they should be by opening up access to international investment opportunities. All yours?
Is it online? Shoot, this is for real. Hey everyone, so nice to take the time out. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Super cool. Hope that you can come away with just a couple gems where everyone here is in such different situations. So when you're preparing to just share certain things you're passionate about or areas of expertise, it's really tough to cater to all different journeys. Like I recognize there's probably beginner investors, and I know there are very sophisticated investors in this room. So all I would suggest is, as we chat, it's probably going to be fairly general, but we are available. We're highly reachable through all forms of social media, through emails. We probably, I would say all of us have, there's podcasts and blogs and literature, respective literature that we have to share that you want to, dig deeper in areas. So if you can't get questions answered, which recommend go to Slido, I would suggest reach out to us individually, check out some of the content we're putting out, and then finally connect with each other, because like I said, there are everything from beginner right through to very sophisticated investors in this room. So don't be shy. Just start a conversation afterwards, like, where are you at? What are you doing? And because money is a weird thing to talk about. Just here it's not. So just start that conversation and be like, why are you doing property? Why are you doing this? And how did you do this? So that's what I recommend. But because I want to start just quite generally again with Hatch and share markets, I thought I would just start very much 101. And what is the share markets? Why invest in the share markets? And then how? And so very base level again. But I just thought that would be a nice place to start, and then again can deep dive with any questions or afterwards. So 2020, financial literacy. I would just say this, we've titled it Money Moves in Your 30s and 40s. Sorry if that's offensive. The reason we did 30s and 40s is because it's 20s, you're kind of still finding your feet, and there's 20s in this room. That's so cool that you're so invested in your future. how cool. I wasn't in my 20s, I was making ends meet in a crummy little apartment in Vancouver, not even thinking, retirement was just so far away, money was just so far away, you're just looking to build your career really. In your 30s and 40s, you find your feet a little bit. You're taking breaks with kids, maybe, you're getting into property, you've got a little bit of money to start to sort out, certainly in your 40s, and you're actually scarily thinking about retirement and this concept of, oh, I'm gonna need money and how can I continue to fund this lifestyle that I'm living. So I'm just gonna focus today on, so that's kind of why we did the whole 30s and 40s, is because we wanna tackle that. You've got a little bit of money, what are some smart money moves to make? A bunch of people talking about different things, but I will talk about share markets in particular, because that's where Hatch lives. And so 101 is a share market is basically an exchange of where people buy and sell, and it happens to be investment products. And so we happen to do US share markets, which is the New York Stock Exchange, and the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ focuses largely on technology stocks. So some of the ones that like Apple's and Netflix and stuff, they'll be listed on NASDAQ, whereas the New York Stock Exchange is one of the largest share markets in the world. They would have a lot of the blue chip stuff that could anything from Coca-Cola to Berkshire Hathaway, they would be listed. Their shares would be listed on this exchange. So it's really a marketplace where people come and buy and sell. It happens to be stocks and companies. The NZX is the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and you can buy and sell stocks in New Zealand companies on that. You've probably heard of a bunch of others. But I'll limit that talk. In terms of what a stock is, when a company wants to they get to a certain size and they need to get some capital and to continue growing, they will list in an initial public offering, which is known as an IPO, they'll list their stock. And what they're basically doing is selling a portion of their company to everyday investors. And they're just saying, we need a bunch of money because we've got all these goals to do cool stuff to grow this business, and we're going to do it by taking all of your money. So they list a stock, and they'll do that through an IPO. Some of the notable ones in the last year, at least on Hatch anyway, were Slack, Uber, Lyft. Controversial because some of them have done well, others have not done that well. If anyone's aware of WeWork, we're in a co-working space. WeWork was a disaster, and that's just such an interesting one to look at. A very recent one also is Casper, which is a mattress company, and there's some really interesting articles on Casper. So there's this whole thing behind IPOs and what that looks like. Anyone who uses Airbnb, I can't imagine anyone in this room that doesn't. They will be coming this year, which is pretty cool, onto Hatch. So IPOs are pretty interesting because these companies either want money or they want, to be fair, Airbnb is going to be direct, but we're not going to go there now. But anyway, so they have stock, and now you as retail investors can buy shares in that company. So you're effectively buying a tiny piece of that company, and what you're doing is you're saying, I back what this company's doing. I believe in growth. I believe that this share is going to increase in value, and that's how I'm going to make money from it. The other way to make money from shares is dividends, and that's a company that's fairly well established, maybe doesn't need all that money to reinvest into their growth, and they'll pay out some money to their investors, and so that's another way to make money off of shares. But effectively, you're investing to either make money from dividends, which is just constant little payments that companies make as a thank you to being their investor, right through to the appreciation of the stock price. I hate to say it, but if anyone's followed Tesla, so sorry everyone, it's like sick of talking about Tesla, but that stock price has gone from when we launched Hatch, it was probably at about $100. I think I don't know what it is today, over $800, it's crazy. So I don't want to say crazy, I can't say that, but it's like, wow, amazing. And so, that is appreciation. So people that invested at $100 now have, done quite well, and we've had some really interesting stories from Hatch investors with Tesla. But anyway, that's why you would invest. The two ways of kind of making money off shares in just very simplistic terms. In terms of other jargon, let's talk about price. How is it priced? Like, what is the deal with a share price? It's very much like any other market in the world. It's effectively demand and supply. So it's like how badly someone wants that and what other people are willing to pay for it. You always have a buyer and a seller, and that basically the share price is the last price that someone bought that stock, that share at, is effectively the share price. And it very much is supply and demand, so you'll have share prices that are considered overvalued. You're like, that's crazy, that makes no sense, that's so expensive based on kind of the fundamentals of that business, you know, how much money they're making or what they're doing or what industry they're in, and others are undervalued. And so there's different strategies that investors employ, but that's effectively how a share price is priced, is basically us, you know, negotiating prices with how much I'm willing to pay and sell this little slice of this company for. In terms of, let's see, other tickers are just the little unique code that, the acronyms that companies are listed at. So Apple is AAPL, Tesla is TSLA, and those are just basically, you can just search up the tickers and see what the recent share price is and look at the historical share price. Just another jargon word wanted to throw out there. And then in terms of, let's just talk quickly about companies. Naturally, companies are listed, and so you can invest in companies on stock exchanges, but another really common thing to invest in is exchange-traded funds. And those are basically funds that are listed on an exchange, and they're traded on an exchange. So an exchange-traded fund, very simply, is just a basket of companies that represents companies in a particular area. The most common one probably would be the S&P 500. So if you were to buy into an S&P 5, that's so jargon, I'm so sorry, but Standard & Poor's 500, it's like an index of a basket of 500 of the biggest companies in the US. So that would be like really common, really massive. If you wanted to invest in, you know, pretty big chunk of the share market, an S&P 500 ETF would do it. And what that means is your investment is automatically spread over 500 companies, the biggest companies in the US, by market cap. So the value of that company, market cap is basically how valuable, how much that company is kind of viewed on the public market. So the S&P 500 would be 500 of the, you know, America's biggest listed companies, and you would be automatically spread over that 500 companies with just ownership in one ETF. So it's very quickly diversifying your money. So instead of investing in one company, you're invested in 500. So that's an exchange-traded fund. Is just like, if you don't want to do a lot of research on a particular company, you might just say, well, I feel good about just investing in a total world exchange-traded fund, and I spread my investments over like thousands of companies, or maybe 500 companies, or maybe in New Zealand there's 20 or 50, and so you're just spreading automatically, letting other people do the research, and you're kind of just building a bit of a fund portfolio. Dean's going to talk more to that in a little bit. But I just wanted to kind of de-jargon some of that stuff. Hopefully I did. Why invest in the share markets? The share markets have traditionally been probably one of the, in terms of its highest returns when you look at any investment. So when you compare it to investing, putting your money in a savings account or putting it in any other kind of vehicle, the share markets have traditionally, historically, returned the highest returns to investors. I'm sure you're all aware of Warren Buffett. He's probably one of the most well-known and successful investors, and he got into share investing when he was 11 years old. And he basically just kept investing. He has a very unique strategy with investing, but the whole point is why invest in the share markets is you can take money and grow it. And historically, the share markets have done very well for investors. So if you look back to the beginning, again, I'm going to use the S&P 500, which is a good indicator of the performance of markets. So it's kind of a good way of saying, how are the markets doing? Is the S&P 500 up or down? That's kind of a general, being the largest share market in the world, that's kind of a general sense of how the markets are performing. I think over the last 20 years, they've returned on average 10% annually to investors. So 10% just by putting your money into shares is pretty good return. I think most would agree. In 2008, we know that wasn't a great year. That was minus 30%. In 2019, just this past year, it was plus 30%. So anyone who invested, at the start of 2019 in that market, or even that ETF, their investment would have increased by 30%. I mean, that's pretty amazing. But the whole point of investing is that it is very much long term, because as you noted with that 2008, like I said, big dip, 2018 was about -4%. It's not a great year, it's pretty volatile. But over time, generally, if you were to look at the share markets over time, it's an upward trend. And 2008 would just look like a little dip right from the beginning of the share markets. Generally speaking, over a long time period, it's going up. Now, the classic thing is to say you can't always look back to look forward, but I suppose the whole point of these companies that are listing publicly is that they're growing. And naturally, of course, very important that you do your research before you do invest in shares, and that you're willing to take that level of risk, because it is quite a bumpy ride if you do invest in shares. So that's kind of the why. In terms of, so if we were just to look at savings accounts, very perfect for short-term savings. They're probably not earning much in savings accounts now, are you? If anything at all. But great if you need your money. Emergency savings, money that you need short-term, great. Share markets, probably looking at about 5 years, is what we like to say, is you probably don't want to be pulling anything out any before 5 years, because like I said, we don't know. Even look at coronavirus and how that's affecting the world, and it's just so unexpected, isn't it? I don't think anyone would. People always talk about the recession and all these things happening, but then these unexpected things happen that actually, oh wow, amazing how the world's connected. Like all of a sudden, companies here can't export or import, and it's amazing how it's all tied together. So. These are unexpected events, and so you wouldn't want to be pulling your money out with a company that is reliant on China at the moment, potentially, if they're affected by that. And so it's something you have to kind of ride it out. And how to invest. I'll just maybe chat briefly to how Hatch investors are investing. So they're naturally investing in companies, and you can do that on any platform here in New Zealand. You can invest in New Zealand companies. There are a few platforms. You can invest in Australian companies, and through us is through US companies. So how people are doing it is all levels depending on your levels of expertise, but a beginner to start with may just say, what do I know? They might look around and say, what are the companies that I really back, that I see everyone using, that I really back? In terms of growth, and that would be probably growth companies. These are tech companies that we're really familiar with, and that we know everyone's using Apple devices or Microsoft devices or whatever. I can see everyone drinking Coca-Cola. So this is Warren Buffett said I would often look to a 5-year-old for investment advice, because I just look at what they're using, everything from bubblegum to Coca-Cola to toilet paper, and I would invest in that because I know that everyone's using it. And so that's probably a beginner strategy for investing, is that just what do you know? What do you believe back to be a growth company? What do you see everyone talking about and using? And Netflix is a pretty good example. I'm not suggesting anything, but I'm suggesting, Netflix is a company that continued to change with the times, and isn't it amazing that we're not watching TV, but we'll talk about the Netflix shows that we're watching. I'm just using that as an example to suggest the trends to look out for. Well, that's interesting, and to invest in. You can invest in some of those trends as a beginner. As you get into intermediate investing, you start to really dive into questioning the company's strategy, who's running it, how, who are their competitors, what's their market share, what's the direction. What's their vision? How well run is the business? And really have to think about it. If this was a startup, would I invest in this business? Would I put all of my money in this business? And do I really back it? And that's how seriously you have to take it when you put money into a company. Is you really have to do your research about it. And advanced investors would dissect financial reports. And it's as daunting as it seems as a beginner. It's actually not that hard to pull out common ratios and just do math. If anyone who's been through college math, we can do this. We can get financial reports from websites, you can get news, you can look at their earnings reports, which are report cards. Every quarter that comes out on the business, you can get a sense of how they're going and decide, is this a company I'm backing and I'm willing to invest in? In terms of exchange traded funds, if you don't have the time to look into companies, you might look into a fund and say, well, kind of back tech, so I'm going to invest in a technology ETF. I kind of back consumer staples. I know that even recessions, everyone's going to need X, Y, Z. So So might be feel comfortable investing in that, or just broad market and just track some really broad market stuff. So that's kind of like how to start, and I just wanted to leave again, financial literacy was my initial point before I went on this big thing. Didn't follow my notes, but it's really about take 2020 to take a few minutes each day to look at your spending, to learn about investing. So all sorts of resources out there. I'd recommend for beginners, Hatch has a getting started course that you can try, and that's basically takes you through 10 days of what are the share markets and how to invest in them. The Balance is a really great website that we love that really demystifies all the jargon of investing. Moving kind of along the chain, Finimize, fantastic, I think it's daily, it's a newsletter that you get that again really helps with what happened in the world and why this matters in terms of investing. Motley Fool is a fantastic resource for more intermediate investors and you want to learn about particular shares. Motley Fool is pretty cool. Seeking Alpha has got a great advanced community that talks about investing. So I'd really recommend just finding where you live, and Investopedia is actually pretty cool. But there's so much content literature out there, but I would recommend 2020 be your year for money moves in your 30s and 40s and 20s, and everyone else to invest in your financial literacy and just do something. So if it's you're kind of committing to learning, if you're just starting small, if you're learning by doing, just do something. And I think that investing in New Zealand is pretty cool right now because it's very easy to start. There's a lot of platforms that require very little initial investment amount that you can learn to do it with. But I'll just leave it at that, quite general, and I'm happy to tackle some tougher questions later.
I love the mention of dividends there as well. I don't know if anyone else follows investors on social media. The investing community on Instagram is really active, and my lord, you should see the excitement when it's dividend season. They're all posting their dividends. So geeky, I love it. All right, we've got Dean Anderson next, who is from Kernel, and Dean aims to help ambitious people find financial freedom. Same, Dean. Through the creation of innovative financial products, though, and that's where we differ. So he did have 5 years as head of product at Smart Shares. He's an expert at creating and launching index funds, but decided he wanted a fresh approach to the New Zealand investment sector, so he made Kernel. So, Dean.
Thanks, Francis. So, obviously with Kernel, our team is experts in index funds and indices. So if you've got any questions later on indices, feel free to come and chat with us. Before I get started, I just do want to touch on the budgeting point. I buy a coffee every day. I think it's really important that you set a bar that's not too high when you get started, and that's the same with your budget and investing. If you go out there and have these huge expectations, it's a bit like saying, New Year's resolutions, great, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. Ain't going to happen. You'll survive 1 week and then you'll give up. And so work your way up with your budget and with your investing. Set something that's realistic, that you're not going to be put off from when you fail to achieve it. The other big thing that you guys all have an advantage of at the moment is two big things. You've got a big time frame in front of you. You've got lots of investment horizon, so you have a lot of choice. You're also still probably about to reach your maximum earning potential. So you have a good income, you're probably all accumulating. I would argue that that probably puts you in a really easy position compared to others. It's a lot harder to have the investing discussions in retirement, particularly at the moment when interest rates are really low. That's raising some really difficult questions for people that are going into retirement or are in retirement, and how do they survive? What income do they have? So for you guys, the big thing is you're probably thinking about, how do I accumulate wealth? We will talk about investment property and other assets. Interestingly though, investment property is now probably out of reach for a lot of people. You have to have a 30-40% deposit. You may not have that yet. So where do you even get started? Maybe investment property is your goal. And so the big thing for us, we're really promoting getting started, and it can be daunting, as we've all sort of touched on, to make that first leap. And there are a number of ways you can go about it. I would argue that you shouldn't get distracted by the noise and the headlines. So we actually did a research piece, it's in one of our blogs, it's called How to Time the Market Perfectly. And we literally looked back over the last 20 years with real market data and said, can somebody who saves their money in a cash bank account time the market, and how do they perform versus somebody that just said, I'm going to put $100 a week in? So in the New Zealand case, over the last 20 years, there's been 5 periods where there's been a fall of more than 10%. So 5 in 20 years. And so we've modelled that out, and the person that literally on day one, 20 years ago said, I'm just going to chuck $100 in a week into the market, outperformed the guy that sat on cash, put it in their bank, and then tried to time the bottoms. And so we're talking about somebody that timed the 5 absolute bottoms, like the down to the day, which is hypothetically impossible, basically. The odds of doing that, you'd be a very boring individual, because I imagine you're going to spend all hours of the day and night sitting at home and researching and reading reports. So the big thing is take that first leap and get started. So how do you go about that? We've talked about it a number of ways. Funds are a great place to start. It gives you the diversification. They're really cost effective as well. So it's a really efficient way to just set something up and start building up your savings and investments. And so the big question comes down to, well, the most important question is how do you split your investments? Is what is your goal? When do you need the money? That is ultimately the biggest question. Kristen sort of touched on it. You do want to have a time frame of 5 years or more if you're going to go into share market and equities, because you do need to be able to ride the ups and downs. And so when I look in here, you'll all have different goals. Some of you may be thinking, I just want to save for the future. You don't know what that is, and that's fine. But you can also break that down. Maybe you have one goal that's saving for, maybe it's for an investment property, maybe to upgrade a house, buy your first home, retirement. So set different little goals, and you can set your investment strategies around that. But if you are looking at the long term and you are investing 4, 5, 10 years plus, you have huge earning potential ahead of you. You've got a long time horizon. You can ride the ups and downs, get started and get into the market and start experiencing it. You will learn as you go. And so one of the other big things that we talk about, and obviously we're very passionate about index funds, one of the big reasons is that index funds compared to actively managed funds, look, all the data shows that they will outperform over time. So where do direct stocks and other assets come into that? Interestingly enough, Kernel, our name, there are a couple of definitions to Kernel. One of those is the core or heart of something. And so we believe in being the core of an investment portfolio. So there's a really common investment strategy that's probably more well known offshore. It's called core satellite. And so what you do with a core satellite investment strategy is you put 60-80% of what you want to invest into low-cost index funds. Why you do that? Because that's going to lock down your market return. That's going to give you the broad diversification and exposure to the market that you need. Then around it you have what's called satellites. And your satellites are the other assets that you want to put into the mix. It may be a direct share, it may be your Tesla shares, it may be it's an investment property. It's the other things that you want to complement that core, but the benefit of the core is it's going to make sure that you've got the diversification that you need and the spread and exposure to the market so that you're going to be able to ride those ups and downs without putting everything at risk in one company or one property. So that core satellite investing is something that we don't see as much of here, even in the financial advisor market, but we are starting to see a bit more of it come around as people go and understand how they can complement index funds with other investments. So that's kind of the big thing from me. Obviously, I think it would be great to open up the panel and start answering some of the questions and hear what you guys have to say, and we'll be sticking around at the end. But take that leap, don't set the budget too high to start with, and you can easily, with all the platforms and technology available today, just start with small amounts and work your way up from there. I guess the other final thing with that, which is a tension that we have, don't go and change your investment strategy all the time. Be it individual stocks, funds, or whether you're going into, you want 20% into US and 40% New Zealand, whatever that may be. Once you're comfortable with that initial strategy, you don't need to look at it all the time. You don't need to change it because that's incurring unnecessary costs and you're reacting to markets and noise. Ignore it. Ignore the headlines, ride the ups and downs. As Kristen said, 2018, pretty average year. Going into 2019, talks of all sorts of news headlines around it's going to be a horrible year, and turns out to be one of the best on record. Does reinforce why index funds are great compared to professional active managers. But that is the thing, you can just switch out the noise and think about that long-term goal. It is a tension of ours though, because obviously everybody now sitting in here probably expects to be able to do it 24/7 on their mobile phone. Put the phone down and go buy coffee.
All right, let's see if this one works. It does. Excellent.
Sweet.
Oh, hello. I must say I'm very relieved that we are all in agreement that coffee is good. I have a personal motivation for hating on that don't buy a coffee. So I'm going to buy a coffee, and I'm also going to buy some shares. You can't stop me. All right, next up we have Darcy Ungaro, who I automatically really like because he's a fellow podcaster. We're taking over. Now, he's been a self-employed accredited financial advisor for over 17 years. On top of investing in property, Bitcoin and shares, he's the host of New Zealand Everyday Investor. And he talks about everything related to building wealth. Go for it.
Thanks, Francis. What an honor as well, I must say. Not just you, but everybody, of course. So I'm a financial advisor, like Francis said, and primarily over the last, I guess, decade and a half, I've been working with people, usually in the 30s and 40s that are trying to make a move, usually with property. And so I wouldn't call myself a property investor expert advisor. That has certain connotations that I like to disassociate with, but there is a flavor of that. And so what I'm going to say is just a couple of things just to get you thinking about this topic. By no means do I want you to act on any of this, of course. And it's going to be a little bit edgy just to get you to think about it, not because I'm right at all, or not because anyone's right for that matter. In fact, I think in this space, a lot of people are really dogmatic, right? Have you noticed that? Like if you go onto a Facebook group, whether it's the property investors group or the share club or something like that, people have an opinion and you have to subscribe to that opinion or else you're out. And one of the reasons why I love doing a podcast is because it's actually quite freeing to be actually open-minded and learn. And there is no right or wrong way around this. But with property, the best way to do it, the way that I would do it, with property, it's one of those things where I guess like with shares, right? There is a barrier to entry sometimes, and that barrier isn't necessarily a financial barrier, it's actually a mental barrier, and you have to get over that educational barrier to actually interact with it. With property, you don't necessarily have that intellectual barrier, not to say that anybody in property is dumb, but you do have a different barrier. You have a big hurdle, which Dean alluded to. You have 20 or 30% is generally the hurdle to get into it. So it's not necessarily an accessible sport to play, but it's one that has its rewards. Just like investing in shares, the difference is, and I think, Kristen, you were saying, you're going to double your money probably every 7 to 10 years in the long run. That's pretty sweet. But it's one-to-one, more or less, because there's no leverage. So the beauty with property is that we have leverage. It doesn't grow in value very fast, but leverage is the secret sauce that makes it work. What do I mean by leverage? I'm talking about mortgages, other people's money, OPP, other people's property, I guess that is. But other people's money. You rent the money from the bank, you take it, you buy a house, you get all the gains. Pretty simple, right? Actually, how many people here own a property? Cool. That's a good amount, more than what I thought. So you're already in the game. And there's a big debate, is owning your own home actually an investment? Some people say no, I see a no over there. Some people say, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Well, maybe it is, but does it produce a cash flow? Is it traded on an exchange? Will you one day downgrade it and live off the proceeds or invest it somewhere else? There's not a right or wrong answer there either, I'm going to suggest. But if you own your own home, you actually have a start. The beauty of it is, though, you could hoist another sail, you could buy another property. You could multiply it, and social ramifications aside for a second. If you did that, if you wanted to expand your footprint, if you wanted to make the best out of that resource that you have, it is relatively easy to do so. And if you do that, then you're going to be faced with this dilemma, or like a fork in the road. Do I take some of my net income, my surplus income, after I bought my coffee, and after I have some sort of investment plan going on with shares, do I take that and do I pay down my debt? Or do I buy another property? Maybe it's a rental property and I'm buying for capital gains, let's say, because I'm young and I want to buy something that's growing in value. I don't want to buy cash flow, I want to buy gains. So if you did that, then you have a fork in the road. You have a decision that you got to make. Am I going to have faith in myself to be able to reduce my debt quickly and then invest more? Or am I going to leverage off my own resource, my income, and take out more debt? Am I going to soak in debt? Am I never going to pay off debt? Well, maybe not, but that's not the point because you'll have two properties. So you can multiply your footprint, own more property, and instead of paying down debt with your income, you're now eventually going to pay down debt with capital gains. That, in essence, is how it's done. It's not rocket science, is it? But you do have two choices. You could pay down debt, or you can leverage off your income and get into more debt. maybe you can do both, and some will try, but it's not necessarily true that you need to pay off debt first before you have some fun, i.e. invest. It's okay to do both. It's okay to do things contemporaneously. So that's just one idea that I wanted to throw out there. And the other question that I want to kind of pose to you is that if you're new to investing, whether it's property or shares, what is financial advice? I'm just going to drop that there. What is financial advice? Is it information? Is it product advice? Is it ease of accessibility? Or is it something else? And that's obviously where people like us fit in. And if you are in that space where you're looking to get personalized advice, there are people out there that help you. This isn't a plug for me, but there are advisors who are there to work for you to give you some guidance and strategy so that you're not locking in a loss and buying into the hype. You're actually, you have a plan and you're sticking to it. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that you're not on your own. There is so much more information than there used to be, and there's a lot of community that you can be a part of to get your knowledge up. But then there's also people out there who are willing to help you, to sit with you and to coach you through it. That's it, I think, for my intro. Go.
Fabulous. I would say as well, it's so true what you said there about there isn't one right way, and I love that about podcasts as well, that we talk about all sorts of different things, because there are lots of options, and then what's on you is to figure out what's right for me, not just what's right for my lifestyle, but what's right for my personality, because the last thing you want is to panic and freak out, and that can derail everything entirely. So it is always figuring out what's right for you. And on that, next up we have Tom Hartmann. Now, Tom is managing editor at a place you may know by a few different names. It's Sorted, CFFC, Commission for Financial Capability, as well as being a very regular guest on the Cooking the Books podcast. I am very lazy because Tom solves all my problems. It's wonderful. His main job is focusing on helping New Zealanders prepare for their future lives beyond work. He's continually developing the Sorted ecosystem of websites, tools, programs, publishing, and he works on lifting financial capability through schools, workplaces, and communities. Go for it, Tom.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be here with you all and to be on this panel. These are great opportunities just to change ideas. And a couple of things I'll say is that very often at these events, it's not like we have all the answers and you are just recipients of all these expert opinions, but very often the answers are in the room. So I really liked what you were saying before, is connecting here at this event, and you'll find that a lot of the answers you're looking for are legitimately here at this event. So we'll find them together. Just to make this a slightly interactive and do something different, I'd invite you to whip out your phones a second and do a quick calculation. Do a quick calculation of what you earned last year and multiply that by the amount of years you think you'll be working. And as you're doing that, I'll also make another point that I know that investing is part of all of our futures here. And why do I know that? Is because in general, our needs go up over time. And investing is one way to solve those needs. When I teach my kids about money and ask them, hey, what's money for? Where I'm trying to get them to is that money is actually for growing. Okay? So when you have that calculation, what I like to do next is take time out of the equation. Okay? So right now, you might be thinking of that money that you have, that you've just calculated, as something in the future. That's something you still have to work for. That's something you still have to earn. And that's all true, but let's take time out of the equation. Let's say that money is already yours, and it's really healthy actually to think about all that money as an asset you already have. And think about what you want to happen with that money from now until the days you stop working. And those decisions that you make with that money are key here. That's what we're talking about. And if you think about all the marketing people who are working in town right now, and they're trying to get a share of that. They're trying to get a share of your wallet. They even talk about wallet share, right? So the decisions that you're making are about that money there. Treat it as it's already yours, as if it's already yours. And actually, we know that many of you, you're going to have incredible careers. You're not going to stay where you are, and your money is going to grow too. So that calculation that you just did, if you just did based on your salary now, is actually very conservative, right? So let's think about what that's about. Now, my work on Sorted is really, if I think about all the people that we've helped, we work with in communities, in workplaces, in schools, online. If I had to distill it down to one thing, it's pay yourself first. Okay, so that all that money, if you did that calculation, is heading towards you. But very often it's going to go out the door. It's going to go out the door on all the things that, all the overheads you have, all the other bills. If there's one thing that you can do in order to lead to success in everything, and especially in investing, it's pay yourself first. How many of you are familiar with that, with pay yourself first, that technique? It's probably the most important thing that I ever put out into the world in the finance area, because once you're doing that, and I'll tell you a funny story. When I first got into it, I was way over optimistic. I was like, yeah, I'm going to pay myself first $1,000, bam. And I was like, no, wait a second, I can't do that. That's not going to work at all. Okay, so that's when you get into things like making a plan for all that money coming in. Essentially what that is, I don't even like to use the word budgeting at all, because all it is your plan for all that money that's going to come in the door. So, paying yourself first. Let's talk KiwiSaver next. Now, we've been talking a lot about investing, but we have the demographic on investors in this country has just exploded, right? All of a sudden, what used to be for maybe guys like me, going gray, middle-aged men, it used to be investing for that. All of a sudden, millions of us are now investors. And so, if you're thinking about just getting started, the fact is, you might already be started. You might already be in shares. You might already. And we can talk a lot about that, but we built some great tools on Sorted. I really invite you to come along and see what you can do in terms of research and making sure. How many of you have picked your KiwiSaver fund? Let's see. Have actually picked yours. See, that's awesome. This is a great switched on audience, but we can talk about that, because actually the ones you have picked, depending on what criteria, and some of the stuff that we may talk about here might not be for you. You might already be an expert, but think about those you're close to too, because there are a lot of people who have not picked their KiwiSaver fund. They just sort of landed in one that basically the government picked for them. And the odds are it's probably not the best one they should be in for them. So we can talk about that too. But essentially, some of the most important things that I can tell you is that calculation that you did, that pot of money, it really has to be your plan for it. And that's what we're looking for. I used to think that all of personal finance was about goals, and it is, but setting goals is actually not that easy. I'll just call it out there, especially when you're doing it with a partner. Having that money conversation is not an easy thing to do. But we really need that money, that pile of money, flowing in the direction that you want, and not the way that every other marketer and everybody else who's selling debt wants it to go, right? I'm glad coffee and avocados have come up, because it is the worst cliche in personal finance. I've totally gotten it out of the Sorted website. But why is it? It's because if you think about it, we should be talking about how much interest you pay in your life, not about coffees. How much interest are we going to pay over our lifetimes, right? That's what it's really about. Another calculation you could do. The more you keep that down, then we're talking about tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially. Another thing I'll say is so we're talking about goal-based investing, and of course KiwiSaver is only good for 2 goals. Really, it's built for 2 goals. It's built for long-term retirement, and if you're going to use it for a first home, right? But many of you will have, just a whole handful of other things that you want to achieve in life, that you want your goals to be. And that's the other reason why investing is so important. You're not going to just have those two goals, right? Those are important, and that's why the government helped set up KiwiSaver, and that's why we need to tune up our KiwiSaver choices really a lot. But those are only two goals, right? There's going to be tons of other ones that investing will be part of the solution. The other thing I wanted to just raise is risk, which is always the thing that comes up with investing. And on Sorted, we've distilled it down. We really, Darcy might have another definition there. A lot of people, define risk in lots of different ways. I'm going to pick on him, but because he's technical, he knows his stuff, right? So, but what I want to say is risk is really about the chance that you might not make it and reach your goals, right? So every time you set a goal, you have to gauge the risks. And risk in investing is no different, because you're using investment, hopefully, to achieve your goals. You have to gauge on how much of a chance there is that you might not make it there, right? And it turns out there are tons of risks. As many of you will know who are investing, there's risks that come with a given industry. There's risks that come with a given area of the world. If you're investing in the States, if you're investing in Australia, if you're investing here, right? There's tons of different kinds of risks. Lots of times the words just get molded together and it's all about volatility, this roller coaster that we're going on. But risk is, there are many, and those should all be addressed every time that you're doing your research about what companies to go into. So a few things, other things I can say, but I'm really keen to get the conversation going amongst us all. Take your questions, make sure. But really, financial capability is lifting your money skills is about all these decisions that we make along the way in terms of our investing. So thanks very much, and let's give it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. The pay yourself first, it's timeless. It is always a good idea. I must say that the day after I get paid, my money goes out automatically to my savings account and my investing account, because if I leave it until the end of my pay cycle, I will have spent everything but $3, and then I'm going to go find a coffee, and I'm going to spend that too. So pay yourself first is key, because otherwise our lizard brains cannot handle it. All right, we're going to jump into audience questions really soon. Before we do that, I'd like to just run along you guys, and we'll start with Tom and work our way backwards. What got you interested in money, and where did you start?
Got me interested in money. Back in the States, I worked in the mortgage industry for a while, and I had a front row seat actually as the GFC took its course and watched it. And part of my job was actually analyzing people's credit reports. I was working for a bank, and they had to make a call on whether somebody was good to loan to or not. And so you could see their financial histories, and I would look through these over and over and over. And basically I got a view into the decisions that people were making with their money. And over time, I'm happy to say that I'm lucky enough to have made a lot of money, spent a lot of money, made a lot of, and early on the experience was really of getting nowhere. I would earn a lot of money painting houses, I would spend it down traveling, earning a lot of, and up and down, and after a while you start to think, well, actually all these decisions, where did they lead to, where did they go up? And so these days when I'm working on Sorted, when I'm teaching my kids about money, really trying to get to that point, some part of your financial life should always be growing. And investing is just a tool in order to grow that.
Same question? Okay, different answer. So, Monopoly? Definitely Monopoly. Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Yeah, definitely. And, but yeah, kind of like, I guess you're probably picking up on a bit of a theme here, that maybe there is this kind of financial puberty we kind of have to go through, right? You know what I mean? And it's disgusting, isn't it? I've got fur when I didn't have fur before. But there is this kind of awkward, and you guys are cringing because you know what I'm talking about, but there is this kind of awkward realization that you come to where you have this kind of aha moment that, okay. And that's kind of what I went through when a group of us friends caught up with one of our friends' dad, and he just told us, I think he was an accountant or something, he just talked to us about budgeting. And at that moment, there was just a bit of a light bulb that went on that, cool, there's this resource that's slipping through my fingers, and not a lot of effort. In fact, just getting a spreadsheet out and just fiddling around with it, and I can actually make some decisions around what I will decide to spend every week. And so I kind of had this bit of an aha moment that spending is a decision. It's not a passive reaction. Spending is a decision. Spending is an active decision that I'm going to make on purpose. And from that moment, in some shape or form, I've always done a budget. And it's more of a discipline, it's more of a headspace that I've been in just so that I remind myself that I'm spending on purpose. And but yeah, it's an interesting question because I've never really thought about it too much. But yeah, it is. Yeah, it's interesting. It's important, and it is like puberty. Leave it there. Cool.
A little more straightforward thing. I was very fortunate to grow up in a family that was just very open to talking about their money. And it's not probably a common thing, as we've probably alluded to at the start. Talking about money isn't a common thing, particularly for Kiwis. I was very fortunate to be in an environment where my family shared everything. They've had their own businesses, mechanics, farms, things like that. So that just, from a very young age, got interested in business and being very open about financial situations. So that was really just the environment I was fortunate to grow up in.
I was brought up in a single mum household and money was tight, so it was an awful thing to think about. I had less money than everyone I went to school with because she had made sure she sent me to good schools so I had good opportunities. So money was stressful. I didn't like it, but I found when I got into really great jobs, thanks to the education and sacrifices my mum made, was that in Canada you put 10% of you pay yourself first. It's 10%. It's just an automatic thing. And I've heard the same thing with South Africa. I think New Zealand is kind of coming up with KiwiSaver. There's some fantastic awareness around that now. But you just put 10% away. And so I remember meeting with a financial advisor who's drawing shit all over a blackboard. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was like, I'm just going to give this guy 10% of my money. And it's turned into a nice little pot of money. And I left Canada 10 years ago, so that's cool. We also had a similar thing to KiwiSaver, and if you maxed it out, you got free money from the government. So I just remember those two things, and so I would suggest it was out of fear and peer pressure that I kind of just got rolling, and it wasn't until when I started into my career after taking a break from kids that I felt empowered with my money. This is my money, and I can make my choices not out of fear, but out of an area of control. And deciding where that goes. So there's a real sense of empowerment there now.
I love that as well. When you start to take control of it, it is such a different feeling. All right, is there a question from the people who are in front of us? Go for it.
Tell us about taxes.
Ooh, which bits about taxes?
Okay, so
the whole panel has different answers.
if let's say we're investing in New Zealand, NZX, you know NZX works. But if it's Hatch, for example, and it's a US market.
Yeah.
I know in your website you handle the taxes on the US side. On the New Zealand side, you'll end up with a report. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Just for the people who are watching online, the question was, tell us about taxes, and then a small refinement. How do taxes work when you're investing through somewhere like Hatch?
Yep. So for Hatch with the US share markets, we fill out a W-8 then. It's this thing that we tell the government that you're not a US citizen, so you don't have to pay US tax. So that's sorted for you. When you get when you're just investing in shares under $50,000, we have this weird thing in New Zealand. It's quite antiquated because when it was made, $50,000 was a lot of money. It's not that much if you're building a pot over time. Now, but anyway, if you're under $50,000, it's super straightforward. If you've got under $50,000 in foreign investments, that could be through any platforms. Think of where you're investing. Or you might have property overseas, that kind of thing. If you have over $50,000, it's a little bit more complicated, but an accountant or a fabulous website like ShareSite will help you with that. If you're under $50,000, super simple. If you get paid a dividend, not all shares pay dividends. If you get paid a dividend, which means money comes in from the company as a thank you for investing in them, you have to report that on your IR3 tax form as a form of revenue and just say, I got paid this dividend, and you pay the New Zealand government a little bit. So we make that super easy for you. So under 50K, super easy. Over 50K overseas, little bit more complicated, and you just work with an accountant or share site to sort that.
Right, and I would also say there's one from Slido that I'm going to send this one Tom's way. If you have 80% of what you need for a house deposit, but you're still saving and you feel like you're 2 to 3 years away from being ready to buy, what would you do with that 80% of your deposit?
Yeah, so if you're using, so it's really about the investment mix, what we call, which is an easy way to say strategic asset allocation. And it's really, goes back to that question that Dean was asking before, is how soon do you need the money? And so in this case, since you know that, you need to pick investment mix that will make sense for that such a short time frame. And so if you want to, you need to make sure that that money is there when you need it, and so you're going to probably dial back your risk and go to a really defensive position, which typically means mostly cash and bonds. Fixed.
Just adding to the time frame thing, we often talk about when you need the money. It isn't fixed. That's the other thing you need to think about. Most people will likely have flexibility. For example, buying the house, you may say you want to buy the house in 3 years, but if you get to 3 years, the housing market's not great, your business haven't gone well, your financial situation's changed, and you can push that decision out 12, 18 months, 24 months, that buys you time. So do remember that you kind of have a minimum time frame and you kind of have your flexible time frame. That flexibility does give you some more options, and I think whenever we talk about Horizon, we kind of forget to think about that there is some flexibility in most scenarios around that.
Yeah, and I would say we're constantly talking about time in the world of money, aren't we? And this is the big thing, is like I get questions from people all the time, because I do invite people to send me questions through social media, and the constant one I get is, I've got a really short time frame, but I want to earn lots of money on it, how do I do it? You have to pick. Is it long-term money or is it short-term money? And if it's long-term money, then great, you can do some things with it and you can make a little more. If it's short-term money, you just kind of have to bite the bullet. It might not be going as far, but it's safe because you don't want to lose it.
Also, it really depends on what your goal really is. That the point I wanted to make about risk before, we were talking a lot about volatility. Let's just say your goal is to get 4%. And the market is doing a lot of volatile things between 10 and 7. That volatility doesn't matter, because you are so much on track to hit your goal. There's a very low risk that you're going to hit it. So sometimes the volatility doesn't matter. It depends what your expectations are, what your goals are. If you need 10% and the market is really volatile, then that's another question. But if you don't need it, if you need something like 3%, it's a very different picture.
And I would say as well, while we're answering questions here, of course, these are general rules of the game. You know, if we were to give proper financial advice, well, most of us aren't actually financial advisors. We're people who know personal finance, but we would also have to look through your bank accounts. So keep that in mind. We're talking the general rules. All right, was there another question from, go for it.
Just for anyone on the panel, talking about diversification here. Question is, let's say you're hearing a lot of communication out there, say from people in the financially independent industry, talking about, just limited number of funds, say 2 funds, 3 funds, that sort of thing. So for example, if we take the S&P 500, so the top 10 companies on that might account for, say, 30%. So how diversified are we really?
The question for those listening at home is how you manage diversification and how diversified you actually are when you're picking different funds.
Yeah, so diversification applies across a number of fronts here. So you're obviously thinking about there within a market and how many companies within a market, but when you're thinking about your investment goals, you're going to have diversification at several levels. So you've got, well, how much do I want to be in equities versus fixed income versus cash? You know, that's the starting point, right? You know, and that's determined based on when you need the money. And so then you want to focus on, well, okay, now I need to get diversification within each of those asset classes. And there are a number of ways to go about that. If you think about going to see an advisor, what they'll do in a portfolio, they will have a mix of markets, because if you look at different reports, different markets around the world, US versus New Zealand, in any given year they're all performing differently. So then you want to have market diversification. And then drilling down on that is then, in that market, what company and fund exposure do you need? How many companies do you need to be invested in, how many funds? And so a starting point, as I talked about earlier, the core satellite thing, the benefit of doing a core satellite strategy within each market and each asset class is that putting a fund in place, one or two funds that gives you a broad exposure, is going to ensure that you get that market spread and diversification that you need, and then you can do the little bits around that. No hard and fast rule, but obviously the more products and things that you put into the mix, the more cost and complexity you do add. So it's a balance around what you're trying to achieve, your level of sophistication, and yeah, that's probably the general answer.
S&P 500 was a great example. If you think of the big companies in the world that we're using, the face of the FANG stocks, their market capitalization, like the value of those businesses are huge. So while an index fund of an S&P 500 is got 500 companies in it, naturally the bulk of your money is going to those big ones, because that's how they split up that fund. So agreed with you, you might not want to put all your money into that one, because then you're highly reliant on these high growth kind of stocks that are, that might be a risky strategy. So a core strategy would probably, for an average Kiwi, would include some exposure to New Zealand, might include some exposure to the global share markets, like a global fund, might include, and I'm just talking kind of passive common strategies that I've heard, might include some bond stuff in there. So agreed, you don't have to be super complex, but that's great thinking that you've got. That you're absolutely right. When it's market cap weighted, it's probably a bit, you're backing some of these really big companies. Yeah.
All right, one from Slido, and I'm going to send this one your way, Kristen, and then Darcy as well. Property investment versus shares.
Both.
Good answer.
Yeah, I'm going to say both.
Two Canadians putting off against each other.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not in a home, do your best to get into property. Like, gosh, is that advice? That's terrible. That's not advice. I just personally, I wanted a home. I've got a family. I didn't want to have to move. We've also rented. I didn't want to have to move school zones. I wanted a place of my own. I recognized the value that property, we got on the property ladder quite early in my life. Got a crummy place an hour out of town. And this is in Canada, and we were able to sell that and buy another, and so we have a lovely home in Wellington. It's nothing flash, but it's really nice to be in property in New Zealand. So the way New Zealand is set up, as it breaks my heart, is property is quite attractive here in New Zealand, and it does break my heart. Like in Canada, there's capital gains tax, and so people aren't crazy about property, and there's not the social impacts that we see here. But it is still a pretty interesting investment thing in New Zealand. That said, we live in a very small market. We're a tiny island on the bottom of the earth, so I would say both, because you need to have your Kiwi saver, you need to have investments elsewhere, and to be diversified.
You trust me? Go property, screw shares.
We do have a blog saying we don't.
I'll be busy running blogs tonight. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's absolutely true. You got to do both, and what I want to add to that is that you got to do both all the time, right away. Buy whatever you can. I know this sounds weird, but buy everything that you can right away as fast as you can. And I know. Yeah, that's the whole idea. But the whole, and it sounds a bit weird, but imagine a train is taking off and it's gathering speed. You want to grab that as fast as you can while it's going at the speed that you can catch it, right? You want to get on as fast as you can. So at our age range right here, I'm going to include myself in there if I can generously, you want to grab that, right? Because you have the longest horizon, and if you can hang on to property and shares, then you know that given enough time, it will do well. Yes, it's more volatile, and that's actually good, because you want volatility, because usually with volatility comes growth. 7 to 10% per annum for the next 20 to 30 years. The Yeah. The thing that's missing here, which I think probably should be mentioned, is, and this again is a little bit controversial, get in debt, stay in debt, don't get out of debt. Now that sounds dodgy as, right? and the reason why is because it enables you to do both. It enables you to expand your footprint, not just in property but in shares. At our age, we've been told to get rid of debt as fast as we can. Is that the best advice? Tom's going to say yes. But just messing with you. But there's a little bit of wisdom here, and it's not for everybody, and you need to be really careful about how you take that on, right? But if money is so cheap, what's your rate of return in getting rid of it? Diddly squat. It is a risk-free rate of return, but if you adjust it, it's not that awesome. You could be doing so much more if you just understand how the game is played. You see it with companies. Cheap money pushes up asset prices. We can play that too. You can get a mortgage. You can get another mortgage, buy an investment property. Why would you get rid of something that is cheap, easily accessible money if you're already in the game? Why not buy shares, leverage up using your home even? Like, this is dodgy. Right? But again, just to get you thinking, right? I very rarely would say this to anybody. I just say this to you guys. I don't know you. Is there some
Darcy, I'm going to cut your mic off.
That's right. But is there some truth in that? Yeah, and just take it on board and think about it, because if there is some truth in it, then maybe there is some action that could be justified. Who knows? Or maybe it's just crap advice.
Advice is not advice. What was it? I do believe it was Tom who once told me that debt is like fire. It can keep you warm. It can rage out of control. Personally, I like to keep my fire extinguisher on hand, but to each their own.
That's right. It's how badly is it burning? I mean, that's why we're so, we're locked into store cards and credit cards and things like that. That's a fire that's out of control. That's an emergency. What you're talking about is not a fire that's out of control.
It's a controlled burn. It's a controlled burn.
Controlled burn. All right. Now we're in the last few minutes. I would love to take maybe 2 more from the people who are here, and I'll do 1 more from Slido. Go for it.
Right, I think all of us are probably have had it. Once they've started investing, they've thought, gosh, I wish I'd known this 10 years ago, right? And I try to correct that by teaching my children about investing. But I don't see any action from the government at the moment to get any education in our schools. That's what anyone helping to teach children or in schools.
For those at home, the question was, obviously everyone who gets into investing wishes they started earlier, same. Can you get into schools? Sorted.
Yeah, so that's fine. Many people aren't aware, but particularly over the last year, we've been rolling out to years 9 and 10 a program called Sorted in Schools, and if you're interested in it, you should definitely go to sortedinschools.org.nz, have a look. It's actually rolling into the New Zealand curriculum, and not as its own subject, but actually in other subjects. Even, digital technology, math is the obvious one, but even things like sports planning for teams, financial capability and investing comes up in all sorts of areas. And so it's coming, it's already there, and it's also in Maori medium education as well. And so that's pretty much every school in the country is getting it. But many people aren't seeing it yet because it's a slow rise. Yeah, it's coming.
You can request it, is that right? Go to school and
Oh yeah, it's a great thing to do. Ask your kid's school on whether they're participating and whether it's coming to them. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I've got anyone else with kids? Yep. So we probably talk to our kids a lot about money, and it's tricky to engage them. So I think the school things good banker is also in a lot of schools in New Zealand, and that's teaching about like mortgages and stuff. I know that my daughter's just started college, and I put her in a money management course. So if it's not in primary, if we can't get sorted or banker, make sure that in year 9, your kids are doing the money management course, which is offered in all colleges. And that, it's cool. She was telling me about the curriculum. It's like they have to budget, and they have to talk about needs versus wants, all this cool stuff. And I know there's investment platforms in New Zealand that have kids accounts. Hopefully Hatch is launching as well, which helps you kind of teach your kids, this is like a savings account, and this is what this is for, and this is for investing, and this is kind of like your college or university, what it's called here. And then just a last little thing, the way I've engaged my son is we've invested in just small amounts of money, but in the brands that he loves, like Nike and Apple
And what I'm able to do then, he knows it's not for his long-term savings, like it's a little bit of money, but what we do is we watch that share price kind of go up and down, because he knows, he sees his friends wearing it, he wears it all the time, and we just do that.
Excellent. Now, I did see 2 hands go up when I talked before. There was one over here. Yep, go.
Yeah. So my question is specifically around property. And once you bought a property, I don't think many people factor in the expenses associated with the property. So what I'd like to know is, once you've paid off your mortgage, you've essentially paid for the property twice, right? Notwithstanding your taxes, your body corp fees if it's an apartment, your legal fees, maintenance on the property. So what I'd like to know is that money not better off in a property index from day one, as opposed to putting in a property and suffering all the losses? Whereas an index, you might get a little bit of volatility, but overall, you're not getting all the expenses that come with it.
Right, for those at home, the question was, if you're trying to buy a house and you want to live in it, there's a lot of extra costs that go into it, rates, maintenance, the interest on your mortgage. Are you better off renting and sticking that in an index fund? Go for it, Jane.
Well, first of all, index funds should be your first investment choice for anything. The property point, picking up on what we're sort of talking about here, obviously property does fit into people's lives, be it your own home, whatever it may be. A property index fund, like we have a property index fund, but the only listed property companies in New Zealand actually invest into commercial property. And there's probably a very good reason that they only run investment trusts that invest into commercial property. They can't at scale make the returns from residential that they could in the commercial space. Costs do come into it, and people forget about all that costs. They forget about their time and labour and maintenance and fixing the broken pipe in the middle of the night. But they are very different things. So investing in a residential property versus a property index fund is quite different. The other thing is that you won't have the same leverage. So the leverage within the commercial property funds is around 30%, where if you're looking at investment property, you go to Darcy, he's going to ramp you up to 95. So you do have that difference. At a high level though, the property market, yes, it does have reasonable returns over the long term. The share market does actually outperform that over the long term, but as we talked about, the leverage is the difference. So there are a number of factors that come into play, and you really need to assess your situation as to whether you want to be in a direct residential property and owning one property, or whether you want to have a diversified commercial property exposure through an index fund. They are very different.
One little thing I'll add there again is KiwiSaver, is that many of you may have exposure to commercial property within your KiwiSaver fund. So that's the other thing to keep in mind.
And I would say as well, don't forget, if you're talking about your own home rather than property investment per se, is bear in mind lifestyle factors as well, not just money factors. I personally think that renters do not have very many rights in New Zealand, and you can end up with a slightly unstable lifestyle. If you're fine with that and you don't want to put down roots, that's amazing. If you want to know that you've got a place that you can call your own for the next 10, 15 years, it might be worth the outlays. These are all things to factor in. It's never purely a money decision. There's also the lifestyle that you need to think about as well. Was there one more question over? Go for it.
It's quite interesting seeing the demographic tonight and talking about, in your 30s and 40s, you've got a 20, 30-year horizon to kind of come up with your investment options. For you guys as relatively new startup kind of target market, looking at the millennial set who tend to want things today and not wait for them tomorrow, how are you going to pitch your business to those guys to look at the longevity that you need to put into this investment?
And for those at home, the question was, terrible, awful millennials, just kidding. How are you going to convince them to be thinking long term like you need for investing?
Yeah, it is something I probably touched on earlier. A big tension for us is, not just millennials, but everybody these days expects 24/7 access on their phones. And we want to encourage and create engaged, literate, investing Kiwis. Equally, we don't want you to look at it. So that's a real tension for us in terms of how do we create that. So for us, we're really focused on creating content and products and a structure that works and encourages good behaviour. It is challenging to try and get people to think long term and if you're realistic, you're not going to see the benefits of that compounding for 5 or 10 years. It's not until we way down the track that you really start to see that ramp up and take effect, and all the rewards from your long, hard investment cycle up to that start to come and pay off. And so it's a challenge, but we need to put good information out there, good tools, and create events like this that get Kiwis engaged. And there is a balance between being digital and talking to people like this and getting you guys to talk to your friends as well.
Think about an answer. I know what we're doing, and it's community. Because with US stocks, I mean, huge, some of the movements in the past year and gains and losses. You can build core on Hatch with the funds that we have available. You can build core with all sorts of cool funds here in New Zealand. But I would say 75% of our investors come to us for satellite. So that's the stuff that's like moving quickly, and they're really investing because they believe in tomorrow. So they're like, I bank on these businesses tomorrow, or they're looking for companies that are undervalued, but it really is 75% of our investors are very much just a small portion of their money is in Hatch, and that's cool. That's probably the right way to do it. And I would suggest community is probably when you invest in Hatch, you get invited into a Facebook community, and there are like hugely knowledgeable people in that community, and so a beginner investor will just say, I've got this, and what about this, and should I sell now? And the whole community chimes in, and I think that's how millennials get their advice these days, and that's why I think this group has been so successful and so noisy, is that it's a safe space to talk about this kind of thing, and to not feel dumb and be like, should I do this, should I do that, and you'll have a whole community that chimes in, and I think that's kind of how they get advice, because they don't have access to a lot of advice. So that's what we found has worked for us.
All right, and we're pretty much at the end of things, but I'm just going to say there's one more that I would like to pull out from Slido. We will have to keep the answers fairly short if we can. Can you simply trust a financial advisor with your money to invest and make all the calls for you, and then just get updates on your gains or losses? I would say, before I'm going to hand this off to Darcy, but I would say that before I got into business and personal finance, I was a court reporter. I don't trust anyone that much, not anymore. But Darcy, what would you say?
Yeah, can I just say before I give it to Darcy to talk about this? We work with financial advisors across the country, and there are great financial advisors, independent financial advisors who are not product aligned, who do charge a fee, but they legitimately charge a fee for a service the same way that you go to a doctor. When you need help, you go to a doctor and an expert, and that's exactly what an advisor will do for you. The key is finding those quality people out there and finding somebody that works with you, and making sure that they're thinking about the things that, what asset classes you should be in and other things like that. So definitely from our perspective and what we see in the market, outside looking at the advisor market, it's a great.
Yeah, so the only thing I'd probably put out there is that it's just like anything, you have to have some sort of initial interaction with that individual to be able to actually get a sense for it. Some people are better than others at gauging character, I guess, initially, and it's not always accurate. So what you do then is you look at what their background is, what the qualification says. You do need to actually think a little bit before you engage with someone. You might trust a doctor blindly, but I wouldn't trust a financial advisor blindly. May I suggest that? But there's a couple of simple rules. Make sure you're paying fees for investment advice, if I can be so bold as to suggest that. At the lower level with KiwiSaver advice, it's very common for commissions to be paid. That's potentially quite appropriate, especially if you're at that lower level. You're not really going to warrant the time of one of those individuals to actually spend with you. So quite often it's not unusual to have commissions paid to advisors from KiwiSaver providers for providing KiwiSaver advice. But when it comes to investment advice, just ask them. They'll tell you what their fee structure is. It's pretty simple. We have to get used to the fact that if you want something quality, you will have to pay for it. And if you don't want the conflict of interest, just pay for it. It's not that big of a deal. And this is the only disclaimer is that with mortgage advisors and insurance advisors, that's excluded from from this. But investment advice, definitely always pay for it.
And I would say as well, is it right, Darcy, that most financial advisors will give you a half hour or so for free so that you can see if you are actually a match? Because as well as anything else, it might be a personality match.
Absolutely, it's you got to feel them out. So we do a 10-minute phone call. I'm not that generous. But yeah, every advisor will have that, and they'll be quite upfront. If you go to the website, you'll see what the fees are and why they charge fees, and you're buying into that. So make sure you understand it up front. It's think about it like your lawyer, right? I don't know if you've had much interaction with lawyers when you're buying a home, but quite often you get a rough idea on what the price is, but you're never actually that clear until you get the bill at the very end, and then you're like, what the hell do you actually do for that? With financial advisors, believe it or not, it's actually quite transparent, it's quite clear. And if it isn't, just push them on it and ask them.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for everyone to coming along tonight. Hatch and Kernel for organising this, Zero Rewired for hosting us, and you guys for some great questions. I think we can all agree we can only get further by talking to each other and having conversations about it. So this has been a great conversation. Thanks everyone for taking part in it.